Happy Friday, everybody. We are here and we are ready to talk some college football, some pro football, some networks, some of the wonderful inside baseball type stuff that goes on at this point in time in the year. And let's kick it off with a little chat about what's going on with the CFP.
Oh, good to see you guys this morning. I don't know.
Kind of you, yes.
Thank you for there. We just to set the stage. They just met on Monday, I do believe.
Yeah.
And interestingly enough, I think for the first time ever, or at least first time reported, ESPN's always kind of been in the room with them. They're their sole partner, but so was Fox. So I don't know if you guys heard about that or not, Matthew, but with that happening for the first time, even though, to the reporters, they say, yeah, we didn't really come up with much today. Just Fox being in the room itself means they're getting somewhere, in my opinion. So I think that's definitely something to kind of broach and talk about today in terms of what does that mean? And I think from your perspective and your knowledge in the industry, you probably have a lot to say on that. Funny enough, what happened, what we saw, we've kind of known Josh Pate's going to be going to ESPN because it got leaked. And I guess they decided to use him one last time as an air quotes indie guy by having him socialize the 20 team situation. And apparently from reports, the only reason why that got brought up in the meetings is because someone in the meetings was like, hey, I saw this thing that Josh Pate said. Has anyone heard about that? That's how ESPN got it in the room without having to actually suggest it themselves.
Right, without saying,
So I'm kind of curious to see what you think about that.
It's a back end thing.
Yeah, and like why do that? Why not just bring it up? What's the point of that? How serious were they about it? I don't know. I just thought that was funny too. So it was a pretty big deal at that meeting to have Fox there. So what do you think
Matt,
of that?
Let me go to Matt here on this one. Matt, when you follow college football as well as anybody, and does it upset you when you see these stories about how the conferences and the networks and all of these other entities are trying to get in to this situation and kind of change the dynamics of the way it's done?
I mean, yeah, I was never a fan of expansion in the first place. I enjoyed the Saturdays. I enjoyed the value of the Saturday in terms of, week by week basis, you can effectively end your season, if you're off your game one weekend.
Sure.
And with the expansion of playoffs and stuff like that, that took that value away, and I was not a fan of that. But at this point, I mean, with the way all the contracts are entwined, you almost feel like you kind of have to include those media companies in there.
Yeah, I think that, from the standpoint of the CFP, they're trying to figure out, they want to expand because it's more money for them and for the schools that are involved. We talked about it the other day. Let me just clear one thing up. And that is, because Fox and ESPN is in the room doesn't mean that they dictate what goes on. What it does mean is that they are part of this, whatever the final solution is. But at the end of the day, the CFP is going to have to clear that with the presidents, the conferences, and all that to get it done. There's still a lot of work to be done on that. So what I would read into having the broadcasters in the room is a couple things. One, what's the evaluation, right? In other words, how much can we, will the market bear? How much is it going to cost to get this done? Or how much should we ask for it, basically? That's kind of like a chicken in the hen house search. You're asking somebody who's actually going to be bidding on the rights, how much should I bid? that's kind of an backward situation. But that being said, they also want to get into what kind of broadcast windows would a opening up a playoff that have as many as 24 teams in it. What's that going to do to how are we going to fit that and make it work? And I think that's probably the biggest reason that it's important to have them there. So they can talk through that aspect of it. I don't think the CFP wants to shut out NBC, CBS, or the streamers. I mean, they'd be foolish if that were the case. But I do believe they've got favored nations relationships with with these two groups, which right now are involved with them. So I think that's what we're seeing here is kind of a feeling out of how much these rights can be worth, and more importantly, how do you make it work physically?
Yeah, and don't forget that Fox has that relationship now with NBC and CBS.
Sure.
NBC and CBS purchased Big Ten rights and games from Fox.
Right.
So likely when they're in there talking, they're also talking for them as well. So it really is like the major networks are all in hand here. I kind of think everyone's already on board with expansion. I don't know if we're just spinning wheels or if it's purposefully holding things up while other things get worked out. But I personally found it very interesting when the CFP decided to change the way they present themselves and market themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It could be a whole lot of nothing, but I just don't really see like them being run by the general and doing pointless stuff. I kind of saw it as a precursor to them when they're going to actually having two playoffs. Instead of calling ourselves the college football playoffs, we're going to be called the CFP. And that's kind of a signal like it's all been approved. Like this is where we're going. We've had two G6 conference commissioners both talk about, a G conference playoff.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the smoke signals coming out of the room are that they're preparing for this. Because that has to happen when they do the subdivision split. Now, people can think that's not happening, fine. But to me, the evidence is all pointing to that it is. And so when that happens, just by rule, like the subdivisions don't play in the same postseason, and CFP goes default by NCAA policy first. So they'll be doing a split there. So you're looking at like who's going to be dealing with what, how are we going to tie these together? They're going to bundle the games together because otherwise networks may only try to go for one of the tournaments. There's probably a lot to work out in this regard. And on top of all of it, it's figuring out how to work together about the congressional situation. It's all tied together. It's all the same people. So it's just they can meet in the CFP meetings and not get FOIA'd. So
Matt, let me ask you a question about this one. If there were two tournaments, right? Mm-hmm. One where the big boys play, and the other where the G6s are. How do you think that would fall with the fans? Would that be something you would want to watch, or is that something that's how that plays out?
I would say it would maybe have some intrigue at first, probably eventually fall into your category of the NCAA tournament versus the NIT tournament.
Right.
The NIT still has power conference schools playing in it. But that's probably where your interest would, and on a larger scale, because football's a larger sport than basketball is. So I'm not saying like that they would mirror each other, but it would probably eventually fall into that category.
If I may disagree, we see with the FCS tournament where numbers of viewerships are upwards of like 2 million. I think it comes down to marketing. I think it's a valid fear, but it's all going to be kind of marketed at the same time. As long as you do the way they prepare it and present it, like if the the G5, the FPS of that time tournament is all being showcased first. Like they're still going to have conference championships, which determine who goes into their tournament. Whereas the big tournament, if they go to 24, one thing people need to realize is going away are things like, I hate to say it, but the Heisman Trophy, because they're moving right into the conference championship window. So there's no window for things like that. So it's kind of going to be the old traditional style of football. You win your conference championship, maybe the 6 of those go on, and then the top 6 of the rest. You're going to have it's a lot more viewership, a lot more.
Well, there's content.
And it's just being shown. Like they don't get shown now. Like they lose a lot of guys. You can't showcase guys. I mean, Ashton Genty was a unicorn. I mean, he's the outlier. But if you're getting that much more coverage on you, because remember, if they have their own top 25 as well to go with that, so just every week you're going to be able to follow the top 25 and know more about it. Whereas now people don't even hardly see these names.
Well, the other thing too is the networks are going to want to put them, let's say, in Wednesday night slots, and you're going to see a lot less of them on Saturday. Because you have to. I mean, you can't. If you put them all together on a Saturday afternoon, and Georgia's playing Alabama, more people are going to watch Georgia and Alabama are going to play than watch South Florida against Rice.
Yeah, no, absolutely correct. I'm just saying, like when the postseason is very supply short, meaning, some of these weeks, like especially at the 8-team week, if you're doing 24, that's only, possibly a couple games a day. Like they're going to have a Friday game and then 3 Saturday games. Like there's open windows. Like there's every single CFP. There are lots of open windows. So, I mean, they could still put some on the weekend, but I do agree with you that you'll probably then see at least 1 or 2, maybe like on a Wednesday. But that's where in the postseason, that's really the best place for expansion because it's the only place where there's just not enough supply. And
right, but the thing that you want to stay out of is getting into the middle of you can't go Thursday night. Well, you could go Thursday night, but you're going up against NFL Prime. Friday night's probably going to end up being a Big Ten SEC type situation. One of them is going to get that.
Are you talking regular season or are you talking
regular season?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The playoff, I do believe the playoffs, if you don't want to, if you're the CFP, the last thing you want to do is to have playoffs compete against each other. So you're gonna have to figure out a way, and so that's why I keep thinking.
But there's a lot of
playoffs begin. When the playoffs begin, that's going to be a Friday night doubleheader of the the G6s.
Sure.
And then we move to Saturday where the playoffs are going to, to go if they expanded, the field of 24.
Could be. I mean, they could whatever they kind of deem best on that. All I'm saying is during the CFP, there's a lot of open windows. Like when you compare how many games are on in the regular season on all the networks versus how many are on when the CFP time, there's a lot of open windows. So there's room to have both of these going. You can start the day with a G6 one and then, have your mid-afternoon be like a couple of, the FAS will call it. But there's just windows galore.
Right. The noon, 3:30, 7:30 windows are where you want them. You're gonna see the playoffs because that's where the audience is.
Mm-hmm.
Now, can you compete against yourself? Yeah. You can.
Especially if they go to like 24, because not all of those early round games are going to be games that everybody is interested in, especially if we go to like a 4 conference setup and they each have 6 teams coming in, and the early rounds are kind of like conference playoffs. Like Big 12 teams are playing each other until they get down to 8. Like you can, at that point, you could have some of that competing. Like it's like there's some people who just aren't going to want to watch. These are kind of like conference games. So I think early on, some of the rules involved are going to be a little bit more like the regular season, where having some overlapping content might be a good idea just to get everyone. Because I think a lot of people probably aren't into just a straight 1 through 24, because it's going to be so heavily like Big Ten and SEC. Versus that, getting that passed and getting rules passed that you need through A4 D1 power, it's a little sketchy. So I don't know. I could be wrong on it. I just think that you're probably going to see a little bit of overlap. How I'm not, in any type of position to be able to figure out, who overlaps and what overlaps. But when you start to go this big, I think you kind of have to take into account some overlap.
Well, there will be some, but I don't know that. I mean, there has to be the juice to make people excited about it. Matt, we've spoken about this before. How are you on the idea of if we move to the playoffs and use the bowl system, would that work, or do you think it's more important that if, say, Georgia wins is in the first round, that they play in Athens versus playing in Atlanta at a different bowl game or something?
Yeah, you got to have the on-campus games. I don't think there's any question about that. Just from the standpoint of when you start to continue to talk about expansion, at some point down the line, I think there's an understanding that there's going to come to be too many games. And so maybe you start losing some regular season games here and there. And with the amount of games they take off campus already, the on campus for a round or two are extremely important.
I mean, at what point here do we have to discount the fans? Because, let's go. We're using Georgia because you're a Georgia guy, but you're also realistic about being a fan. How far? How many games can a Georgia fan be expected to go to as you move, progress through the playoffs?
Yeah, exactly. And that's because, I mean, look, it's like what with Indiana fans did last year, how they travel really well. And it's easy to travel like when it's 1 year, but now you're getting into a territory where these teams would be traveling annually, essentially, if you're the top programs, because there's going to be a certain cluster of programs that make it year in and year out, and eventually you're just going to kind of lose a little bit of that fan support on the road.
It's you're asking a lot to tell people, okay, well, this week you're playing on campus. Next week, you're playing 2,000 miles away.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not to mention, is there's also an expectation of, and granted, it's not expected to be like sold out, but there are people that are expected to go on the road and go to those games, and there's potentially some neutral sites in the middle of the season or the start of the season for some teams as well.
That's true. There used to be a lot of those, and we've seen those kind of disappear.
Yeah, and like some of the examples, like Oklahoma and Texas have the Cotton Bowl, Georgia and Florida have the cocktail party.
Mm-hmm.
These are annual games. I know there's others that I'm not thinking of off the top of my head, but a lot of teams go to neutral sites to either start their season or have some kind of a set in stone rivalry.
In regards to that, I mean, this is kind of the beauty of the system, though, is that with the 24, there will be 8 buys in that first week. And those are some of your biggest programs most of the time. They won't have home games in that first week. So you at your next tier down, your 9 through 16, those are the guys that are going to be hosting. And that's going to depend upon if they just do straight 24 or if now you're looking at your conference playoff play-in type of situations, but it's going to be different hosting stadiums. So I think that can do a very good job of counting and leaning upon different fan bases to really fill those stadiums. The first week's going to be whoever's home there, but whoever wins there in that second game, they're not going to be the home team. So it's not the same fan base that you're dependent upon twice in a row based upon that build. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think it spreads it around. So, there's going to be some people who will travel, who will go to all these, and, maybe that's 4,000 or 5,000 or whatever, and that's your traveling group. But it's the way they have it set up with those buys, the way it would have to be, but with the 24, it would do a very good job of accounting for that issue, which is, would be an issue, but it should put the onus on the different fan bases to each have one game in those first weeks. The question then becomes after that, once you get to the week of 8, is that when you're going to do neutral sites and open this up more to the general population? That for me is kind of where it comes into question with the 24 is the week of 8.
Well, you could, and this is just excuse me, this is just a thought. You could make the group of 8 be neutral sites, at which point the neutral sites would pay to be the neutral sites, much like you do in college basketball.
I think that's where the big money is.
You don't think Jerry's World and a bunch of other places are going to, SoFi Stadium, they're all going to want a piece of this pie if you go that route.
Oh, yeah. It's one of the biggest problems with it currently is that the bowls hold those spots, so there's no bidding.
There's a fixed amount of money, but there's also a problem in that you've got sponsors which may not be the CFP sponsors.
Oh yeah, because they're the bowl sponsors.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I've said for a while, I think that we are in the last bowl contracts. I think once the subdivision splits, I mean, it's not going to be called the football bowl subdivision, although that will still exist, but I don't think a lot of these major bowls are going to be as interested in that. I don't know if the autonomous schools are even going to want to still doing those. I mean, we see a lot of negativity towards them now from ADs because they cost more than they gain. And the CFP locked in, as they said, part of their little latest marketing thing, locked in with the bowls that are part of them until 2030.
Yeah.
And that's basically when these bowl contracts come to an end. And, I don't like to just be a bearer of bad news, but, it's kind of pointing out some of these things are going to come to an end. And it's in the CFP's interest for that because once, as you're saying, once they can open that up for bidding, both on sites and on sponsors, that is a lot more revenue that would be coming into that.
Matt, you and I have spoken numerous times about this. I mean, Kirby Smart was very upset when they played Florida State in the Orange Bowl, and they didn't actually play against Florida State. There were jerseys there that had Florida State people in them, but they didn't do it. And we talked about how so many players in this past bowl season chose not to play. And so I don't know if that's going to be something that is also going to be a problem, because bowl games in many regards is in the past, let me go to in the past, was kind of it was a treat. In other words, your last college football game, because most of these guys aren't going to play in the pros. So your last college football game was a game where you got to go to Miami, where you got to go to a number of different lovely places. They had a great week. You had plenty of time to get some swag and some final thoughts in, and it's that kind of fun. But I'm kind of at a point where seeing that go away is kind of sad, because it used to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it used to be a good thing, but yeah, they are looked upon very negatively now. And part of it is there's too many of them, because we've added a lot of bowls, and so it's kind of diluted.
There's only 37, Matt.
So, yeah, and so it goes back to when you have teams that are now 5-win teams that are getting in these bowl games on the back end. It's it's like, okay, what are we doing here? Like, now it almost feels like something you have to do instead of something you got to do.
It's funny. I was talking to Dan Mullen when Dan was at Mississippi State, and Mississippi State went 5-7 one year, and made a bowl because they needed an SEC team, and all the 6-6 all the SEC teams that had had the records to reflect that it already landed in bigger bowls. And I asked Dan, are you excited about going to this bowl? He goes, I'm not excited about the fact that we play the past three regular season games, let alone going here. I would much rather not go, but it was one of those things where they went and they represented and they did what they're supposed to do. They entered the contract. And see, there's where every bowl except for the New Year's Six bowls are actually in the Sun Bowl is one, and another one. Let me just put this: the majority of them were put together for programming purposes for ESPN, and they actually have a marketing department. ESPN does, where they bring the sponsors to these bowls. And so I think those sponsors are just going to, I guess, if we're doing what we just said is going to happen, those sponsors will have to be involved, or if they choose to be involved, will be involved with something with regard to neutral sites with the CFP.
Probably, but if that new subdivisional situation happens, and you have some conference playoff style plans underneath the CFP umbrella, you're probably going to have specific networks who have the one up on terms of getting that programming, because those campuses better. Your broadcast team knows those teams better. You have the better connections there. I don't know. From your perspective, I'm kind of curious what you think on that. But it would seem to me, if, like, say, the Big 12 has this plan, the SEC has its, the Big 10 and the ACC, that whoever already has deals with them is probably going to get the broadcasting deals there. Like Fox and NBC and CBS will do some of the big ones. Fox may also do some Big 12. Does that make sense to you, or is that just kind of overthinking it in terms of like the production knowledge?
Well, I think, are you talking about regular season now or playoffs?
Well, I'm talking playoffs, but because of their regular season contracts and their experience and knowledge and relationships, that may carry over into the situation where they expand like this. And that's kind of where I think like Fox is coming in, because if you're going to have like just big versus big, they have their deal for the conference championship game. They kind of might also then have to be involved in this, because don't they have like first rights? I don't know how.
Well, right now they do,
right.
But in a new deal they may not. Broadcast deals with regard to regionality. You know, guys who are, you know, who have done the games and who know the games. Um, I think that it really is going to sound silly, but it's going to depend on the value of the game. Let's say Georgia's playing Oregon, right? That is a marquee game where you're probably going to get, you know, Herb Street and Fowler if it's an ESPN game. If it's an NBC game, you're going to get Eagle and you're going to get, you know, was it Klatt that does their egg games?
Yeah.
Joel Klatt.
Mhm.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, it really depends on how it comes out, right? It's if you have a premier game, you're going to want your A crew on that game,
Yeah.
regardless of whether they're, you know, have a history with the conference or not.
Right, and I would suggest like that comes into play like when you get to the round of 8 or whatever, when you start to mix up. But I think some of these early rounds in this, if it goes this way, not the initial one, like if it's right now, all FBS, and if they go to a 24, it's going to be, you know, largely just based on rankings. But if
it's Fox and it's the Big 12, you know, involved, it's probably going to be Timmy Brandt and, you know, fill in the blank for Fox. They're, you know, they're going to have to figure out. The first couple rounds could very well, you know, use your regional talent. And I say regional talent, which is not fair because Sean McDonough has done the ACC, but Sean McDonough has also done numerous national games. So, you know, you're going to get a good team regardless of where it is.
Oh, of course, but like those teams know, the broadcast teams know that the teams already from the regular season,
right?
So they might be better prepared to actually do those broadcasts. I mean, say have ESPN's broadcast team doing the big versus big playing games. You know what I'm saying?
No, I do, and I think what happens in the cases like that is you get the play-by-play guy is the I'm not. This is going to sound terrible. I don't mean it to sound this way. The play-by-play guy can call any game. They don't care. It's the color analyst. It's the guy who sits in the booth and tells you what's going on is the single most important person in that regard. So let's say it's an SEC thing, right? You're going to want your best SEC analyst on that game, and regardless of who the play-by-play guy is.
Sure, but you also like those guys have relationships like on air and comfortable.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just saying that you could see a mixed up. And that didn't sound right. You can find a team that is a playoff team where you've got one broadcaster is your play-by-play guy, and he sits down and has the color analyst right next to him. So it's quite possible you might have split crews that normally didn't work together necessarily in the regular season, but in the playoffs, you know, you want your best, you know, the best you can put in there. So
sure,
I think that's kind of getting way into the minutia.
It's way into the minutia. I was just kind of meaning like the networks have certain relationship with the conferences. So if like the first round is of, you know, 16 teams playing, or there's 2 big versus big games, 2 SEC versus SEC games, like you would kind of think that certain networks would be able to gravitate towards those because it's not just about how much you're paying, but also like the quality of presentation.
Well, the money's got these games are going to be produced to the max,
right? But there's like if it's 8 games in that first round and in the second round, like everyone's going to need their A guys still going on that, plus your B guys. Like that's
you're good. You know, it goes like the NCAA tournament, right?
Yeah,
you're going to get, you know, the first round is going to be some guys that are on the peripheral, and then each, as you move closer and closer to that Final Four, the quality of the broadcast teams keep getting higher and higher.
Yep, and especially that's the case if like you have the 8 games for the FAS, but you also have the FBS thing going. So if there's 12 teams in that, now you're looking at another 4 games.
Yeah.
So that's an awful lot of broadcast crews that
there's enough broadcast crews out there to do it. Matt,
but I'm just saying, like, there's a connection for conference to network connection at some point in this.
Matt, when you watch games, we all watch games. Is there a crew that you like better when you sit down and watch an SEC game?
I'm a little partial to Sean McDonough and Greg McElroy.
Mm-hmm.
I think they do
good guys.
Good job.
Yeah, Sean, they're good guys.
Even if I've had to listen to them call 2 Sugar Bowl losses in a row.
Yeah, that's painful. Fortunately, for them, they don't have anything to do with that. But the funny thing is, Sean lives on Martha's Vineyard. He's a Boston guy, and his dad used to be one of the top writers at the Boston Globe in sports writers. And as a matter of fact, Will McDonough was one of the first analysts that CBS hired to do NFL that wasn't a former player. And so Sean has a long history of doing games, all over the country. And I think you can just parachute Sean in anywhere and he can be good. McElroy, I think, is a young guy his star is on the ascent. I think he's been doing really well, over that whole situation. So, yeah, I mean, I think we all have favorites that we'd like to do, and Sean actually also does ACC from time to time. So, I think that again, that's where you can parachute a play-by-play guy in, but you really do need or want to have that analyst be the guy who has a firm grip on what's going on. Because honestly, guys, it all boils down to the relationship between the color analyst and the coaches. How much are the coaches trusting this guy to tell them what they really want them to know versus coach speak? Because I've sat in meetings where coaches, are talking to former players or former coaches who are the analysts. And, the fact that myself and Merle Harmon or whomever I was sitting with, it was like we could have been sitting there and not even being, totally ignored. In large part because the coach likes to speak to a former coach or a former player. Doesn't necessarily need to speak to us. Some were very kind and very nice and didn't and would address a question from us, but we kind of turned to let the coach and the player, former player or former coach have their conversations, and we just were kind of like flies on the wall. So anyway, is it? I mean, obviously, something like this 24 team playoff benefits the Big Ten and the SEC. How does the? Because they're the ones who support it the most. What does that do? Does that diminish even more the Big 12 and the ACC?
I'm not sure what you want to say, but I have some contention to it in terms of that, because so much of getting to that point is going to be dependent upon getting rules passed through, the cabinet and D1 governance, that I actually don't think they're going to build it in a way that just turns it into the SEC and Big Show. I think if you were to have it just be wide open like it is now, that's what it would become. And I actually kind of find that to be boring. Like I would like to see, even if maybe the teams aren't quite as good, like the Big 12 and ACC get their part of this. So I really like the conference playing, and I think for all four conferences to work together on this, that's probably what's going to have to happen. So I think you're going to see pretty equal representation in there, and you probably don't want to have them all playing against each other in the first round or so, because it's odds are that it's going to, not be who wins and who loses is not going to be evenly spread out, at least not initially.
Right.
We let this thing build up. You get new partners in with Big 12 and ACC. Their money goes up. Who knows in the future? But I think initially they go with a situation where it's going to kind of feel like conference playoffs at the start. It doesn't necessarily mean there's equal payouts, right? but equal, equal representation, at least starting off. I think that's probably best for everyone involved, because with the Big Ten and the SEC fighting over who gets in, like SEC got in 5 last year, and that was, even then you could kind of tell, like, they're like, oh, maybe that was a little too much, because they ended up playing each other and beating each other. Now, and the Big only had 3, and so if everyone gets in 6, like, that's all right. That's a lot. That's, if we get up to like 20 teams, that's still almost like a third of your conference. So I don't think that if you go in that big that there's really going to be much of a fight in terms of how much representation you get. So
yeah, let me ask Matt, because we've talked about this. There's not 24 football teams that can win a national championship.
No.
Does that matter though?
Well, it does. I'm not saying it matters to what you're watching, right? Because it's programming and it's money. But realistically, when you get a school in, 24 of the 24, I would say only probably 5 or 6 have a legit chance at winning.
Sure, but that's the case with the NCAA basketball tournament too.
No, I get it. I'm just saying that you run the risk of putting too much out there. Sometimes more is just more. And I don't want to see, if they're going to do this, I'd like to hope to think that they would do it right. And I'm not sure what's going to happen in that regard.
What is right though? Like, I look at it as like, okay, the bowl age is pretty much over, but that's a lot of content that people used to have.
Yeah.
And now those games are just not that good. Whereas every single one of these games, even if it's 2 teams in there, you look and you go, neither one of these have a shot at the title, but they're still going to be playing full teams, full rosters,
right?
Like, really into it to go on. So, like, these are going to be good games. And
well, you hope. Yeah,
you'd hope, but like, there's a higher chance in these bowl games. Like, these bowl games are 3/4 of them are trash.
The bowl games are dead.
Right. So we need to replace that.
Right.
And so these, like I don't understand the argument from people about, well, none of these teams, like, so many of these teams will have a shot at the title. It's like, well, who cares? If this team who's, you look at it at the start of it and you say they don't have a shot at it, but say they win through. Like, the Giants won a Super Bowl when they only had 9-win season.
Right.
But we don't discount the Super Bowl because they won it on the field. So right. I think it's enticing. Like, man, we could have a real Cinderella pop up at the end of the season. Like, and what's wrong with that? I don't understand why people want to gatekeep that. And that's just me.
I'm not necessarily gatekeeping. I'm just wondering.
That's just, that's a big debate.
Yeah.
In the public space.
My hope is that you really have to pair these things up, right? And I think that's the key, is to really understand how to slot these games so that you don't have, a team that is so much better than the other that it's gonna turn people off to watching it.
We already get that with the G6 versus, like, we already get that now.
Right. I'm not saying, but I'm saying I prefer to. I would hope that they could figure out that that we need to have some concept of how we do this, whether it's regionally done or whether it's nationally done or whatever. I think that I would like to see the regionality of it, of the playoffs, versus necessarily an automatic national situation where where a UCLA comes to play football at Georgia, and it's not as attractive as if Georgia were to end up playing Ole Miss, because they're also in the same.
Oh, totally agree. Like that's absolutely what I think is going to happen. Like if you have 6 teams coming from each conference,
right?
Like say they're division winners and 2 wild cards,
mm-hmm.
Then you have your conference playoff that is underneath the CFP umbrella. So like your 6 goes to 4, and then your 4 goes to 2, and then when you have 8 teams total, you just reseed it, and that's when you have your cross division games.
Yeah, I mean, if you get to the 8 games, and then they're at neutral sites, fine.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I would like to see, if they're going to do it, like East Midwest, break yourself into regions, and make it so the games mean more because there's a regionality to it. And to Matt's point about fans, it would make, if Georgia played one week against Ole Miss, and then the following week they played against even a Big 12 team or an ACC team, at least it would be closer in the region than it would be having to take on a team that's coming across country to play you.
Yes, if I may, just kind of devil's advocate on that, that's what they've tried to do with the basketball tournament, and it's totally kind of spun out of control and not been that way. And I don't think you're going to see certain regions always be equally represented in the finals. So it's like, it's not going to work perfectly that way. What I think really works well is the fact that your first round, whomever is home team, is not likely going to be home team in the second round, because they're not. It's the teams that got the buys are. So when you say like Georgia, if they get a bye, they're not in the first round, and then someone comes to their home team, and then you go to the week of 8, which is going to be at some neutral site. So I think that handles itself. Now, when you say regionality, I say, what conference? Like instead of like East, West, North, South, or whatever, it's Big 12, Big 10, SEC, ACC, and then say instead of having a conference championship and having, then we only each send in 1 team, they send in 8 to the combined aspect, and that gets reseeded, and that's where you determine really who's getting paid more based upon results at that point in time, because
it's gonna be interesting, and the price tag is gonna be pretty steep.
Huge. I think that they're drooling. I think ESPN just wants to make sure that they save what they have. They want the rankings shows, especially if there's going to be 2 of them. They've got a lot to protect, but it'll be, and that's why I think a lot of people start to learn more about the G's as well when ESPN is putting on, the ranking shows that showcase that. Yeah. I think so. I could be wrong on that, but I think that there's a lot of opportunity in it.
In a perfect world, Matt, what would you like to see?
I don't know. What I will say is I don't think there's there's going to be a world where you're getting 6, 6, and 6, like out of all four. I just don't think that the Big Ten and the SEC are going. I think they have too big of a voice, and they will not let that happen.
That's not taking into account the D1 governance situation. Then.
I still find it as a hard road ahead in terms of getting equal representation across.
Then the Big 12 and ACC can block anything in D1 governance right now. That's what doesn't get talked about much. So I understand everyone talks about how the Big Ten and the SEC control the CFP, but what the CFP is going to do in the future is very much dependent upon what's going to get passed in a Division I governance, which has now become a situation where the A4 combined, not as a whole, but each their individual weighted votes now combined, can pass anything they want as long as they vote together. If one of them votes against it, then they have to try to get some of the other people in the board to then vote with them. So, well, I get that, and that's a very common belief. People aren't tying the two things together. That's why I say I think there'll be equal representation, and I know that's kind of hard for people to understand based upon the narrative out there, but there won't necessarily be equal payouts. And that's where people have to try to figure out where the compromise is. Because if they try to do that, I think that they have a hard time at the D1 governance level. And that's what they've been working on for over a decade, is to get that power. So that's really the important thing behind the scenes.
Well, again, I see what Matt's saying. You can't, if each conference has 6 teams in, there may not be 6 teams worthy of being in the playoff.
If each one of them, like 4 of them are going to be division champs. That's one of the things they have to pass to D1 governance, is they have to raise the cap on the number of division the conference can have. It's currently capped at 2. But so then now they've won something. It's basically built off the NFL, and this is also very similar to the model that Petiti ran and pushed through Major League Baseball, which we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of them has something, and then the other 2 would be like wild cards. So those would be based off of earning it. They would be based upon the record. So that's why I say, like, it's just something that's very different from what people have now. And I could be wrong on that. But if you go to this point where you're like, we're going to do rankings for 24 and it's only out of these 4 conferences, you're gonna end up with like 8 to 10 teams from like either the big or the SEC. That, I look at that and go, that's just kind of you. That's like the whole argument of like who deserves to be there at that point if you're only pulling from 4 conferences. I think you need to have a very rigid system, so that way it doesn't bring opinion into play, because it's going to be pretty ugly if you have, one year you have 12 teams from the SEC in that thing. Like
that would be very true.
And there's no way you could really control that if it gets to that point. It's too late.
Absolutely. Okay, let's see. Tell you what, let's put a pin in this and let's just real quick take a look, as Matt and I always like to do on a Friday, and let people know what's going to be on for this weekend. And we've got a really big weekend of NFL preseason. Now, last night Arizona looked good in their game against Carolina. No, that wasn't. I'm sorry. That was the Hall of Fame game. Who did Arizona play?
Raiders. Wasn't the Raiders?
Raiders. Yeah, they play. They look good against the Raiders. I watched a little bit of that game, and it was pretty good. They played well. Let's move to what's on tonight. Tampa Bay is at the Jets. That's going to be on the NFL Network. If you happen to be in the Bay Area, it's going to be on WFLA. If you happen to be in New York, it's on WCBS. But it'll be the Jets and the Buccaneers. They practiced together up in Jersey this week, and they're going to play each other there. Denver comes to Atlanta. KUSA in Denver's your local TV station there. Local in Atlanta is WAGA Channel 5. And it's going to be on ESPN Unlimited if you happen to be have the ESPN app. Any excitement? What's the buzz about the Falcons this season, Matt?
Camp. I get a general vibe of doom and despair. They've already had Jalen Walker go down with an ACL. Not sure on James Pierce Jr. and his potential suspension for the domestic assault in the offseason. You pair that with a banged up quarterback room already, and I would say that the vibes probably aren't very high.
Who's QB1?
I guess at this point it's Tua. I know Penix had a back thing flare up, so I would assume it's Tua.
I think Bo Nix is back, right?
I believe he should be. Yeah.
Not that he's going to play tonight, but he's back in Denver.
Yeah, because if I remember correctly, he just broke his ankle, which was like a 6-week recovery.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he broke it the wrong time.
Yeah.
Miami is in DC for a game tonight. I'm not so certain what the hell you're going to see there. Those are two teams that can roll the dice. Who knows? I don't expect a great deal out of Miami this year. I do expect that if Washington doesn't do well, then they're going to blow up the coaching staff. That game is a 7:00 game on WFOR Channel 4 in Miami. KUSA, CBS's outlet in Washington. Then we move to Saturday. Cleveland taking on Chicago, which may be in Indianapolis, which may be in Indiana in a couple of years. And Cleveland's going to be out of Cleveland. So it'll be Berea versus Terre Haute, Indiana, with the names of Cleveland and Chicago on their uniforms. That's a 1:00 Saturday afternoon game on NFL Network. Locally, if you're in Cleveland, it's on Channel 5. And it's on Channel 32 if you're in Chicago. The Giants and the Minnesota. Minnesota comes to the G-Men. New coaches all over the place, but Harbaugh has got his walking papers here with the Giants. He's their new head coach and taking on a Minnesota team. That should be an interesting 1:00 game on Saturday afternoon. Let's move up to Carolina and Buffalo. A lot of brouhaha about the new Buffalo Stadium, guys. Any talk about anything you've heard that is interesting about the stadium? I guess I can't believe that they actually have obstructed seating in a stadium in 2026. I don't know how that happens.
Yeah, it seems like they have a good bit of it too, and there were some complaints about the, I guess, lack of covering that they felt like they were promised.
Yeah, they didn't want a dome stadium, but I don't think they wanted a little bit of coverage.
Yeah, they don't have much of anything there right now.
4:00, the team that I think you and I both feel is probably the best team in the NFL, if not the best team in football. The Rams are taking on Kansas City. That's an NFL Network game at 4:00. It's KCBS if you're in Los Angeles, and KHB Channel 4 in Kansas City if you are in Kansas City. So storylines here. Jacksonville is in New Orleans. That's a 4:00 game. That's on WFOX in Jacksonville and WVUE in New Orleans if you are a fan of the New Orleans Saints. Philadelphia is in Charm City to take on Baltimore. It's WCAU NBC 10, in Philly, and WBAL Channel 11 in Baltimore. New coaches there in Baltimore, and everywhere in the east, in that whole northern Virginia. I'm sorry, northern Virginia, northern division. Everybody's new coach. Dallas and Seattle. That's an 8 o'clock game on the NFL Network. And that's it, boys and girls. Let's zip quickly through tonight and the weekend on baseball. Tonight's game on Apple TV. It's actually this afternoon's Apple TV game. St. Louis and Chicago, Boston and Pittsburgh. That's a 6 o'clock game on the Major League Baseball Network. White Sox Detroit's the alternate game. Yankees Toronto is on Apple TV as well. That's the 7 o'clock game. Yankees Toronto. Arizona and Atlanta is on Peacock. Major League Baseball Network has the Angels in Kansas City. Milwaukee and the Dodgers are 10 o'clock ESPN Limited. And then Colorado and San Francisco is the alternate game on Major League Baseball Network on Saturday. Major League Baseball at 6, the White Sox in Detroit. That's a 1 o'clock game on MLB Network. Washington at the Mets on FS1 at 4. Then the night games are Milwaukee and the Dodgers, 7 o'clock. Most of the country will see that game. Milwaukee and the Dodgers. Arizona is in Atlanta. That will be seen by most of the folks in the Arizona, Atlanta area. And Boston and Pittsburgh is that's an interesting matchup. I haven't seen that in a long time. That's probably going to be Western Pennsylvania and the greater Boston area. Rangers and A's, 9:30 on ESPN. Kansas City closes out the evening on Peacock against the Angels. And then Sunday, the early game is Baltimore at Tampa Bay. That's a noon game on Peacock and NBC Network. The Yankees and Toronto and MLB. MLB alternate is Arizona, Atlanta. Washington and the Mets are on ESPN Unlimited. Boston, Pittsburgh is on Peacock at 1:30. St. Louis and the Cubbies are on ABC on at 3 o'clock. And the night game is Seattle and Houston. So there's your situation there. And Matt, where are they playing golf this week?
It's the St. Jude. I believe it's
in Memphis?
Yeah. First round of the FedEx Cup playoffs.
All right, there you go. So everybody knows where to watch something. And boys, thanks so much. I think we got a lot of information out there, and I think that there's a lot to chew on what's going to happen with CFP. And as the old saying goes, stay tuned, because it ain't over yet. That's for darn sure. But it's good to know what's going on. It's also good to have football back. So we'll have some fun stuff coming up in the not too distant future talking football. So thank you guys for joining us this afternoon. To Matt, to everybody who joined in our audience. And we'll see you again on Monday. Take care, everybody. For the gang, I'm heading out. We'll see you on Monday.